Hello and welcome to the Population Factor. I'm Phil Cafaro. Population concerns are sometimes dismissed because the rate of global population growth is decreasing. But is humanity overpopulated already? And if we are, what, if anything, can we do about it? Here to discuss these questions are Karin Kuhlemann and João Abegão. Karin holds degrees in law, politics, and biology. Her doctoral dissertation from University College London reconciles the human right to procreate with a legitimate need for government policies to limit population. She's the author of several terrific articles on population and the environment, including Any Size Population Will Do, The Fallacy of Aiming for Stabilization of Human Numbers. João Abegão's academic background is in ecology and environmental health, and he's now writing his PhD thesis at the University of Lisbon on the theme of societal and systems collapse. João helped organize a panel discussion on population and climate change at COP25 in Madrid in 2019. He's also the author of the Human Overpopulation Atlas. You can find links to João's and Karin's publications on our website. Karin and João, welcome to the Population Factor.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Phil.
So let's start with the basics. João, how many people are alive on Earth today? And how does that compare to 50 and 100 years ago?
So today we are roughly, if we can follow the estimates, we are approximately 7.8 billion of us, Homo sapiens, on this Earth. Compared to 50 years ago, there was probably 3.8 billion humans on Earth. And around 100 years, there would be less than 2 billion. So we have almost quadrupled in 100 years from now, from today.
And what are our population projections for the rest of this century?
Oh, those range quite a lot. It depends on a range of factors, from fertility and the decisions that we made and the life expectancy. But they can range, and they have been changing quite a lot. From this is worth noting that they have been revised upwards almost every year that they come out. So the estimates for the end of the century were around 15 years ago about 9.4 billion, and now they are close to 11 billion. So we have been seeing this number cripple upwards constantly.
So just to throw a few more figures out at people, if you look at the UN's most recent world population projections from 2019, they have a main projection of, or median projection of 10.8 billion people in 2100. That would be up from 7.8 billion today. But they also note that those populations could fluctuate by billions of people, a point both of you have mentioned in your writings. So for instance, the 10.8 billion median figure, if women on average have just 1/2 more children per person between now and then, that figure increases to 15.6 billion. If they have 1/2 child fewer, that instead would drop to 7.3 billion, lower than today. So the point I'm making here is that depending on policies and choices that people make, we could be looking at very different populations in 2100.
May I come in on this, Phil? Because
yeah.
I feel like I have a bit of an axe to grind.
Uh-huh.
Population projections have a great deal of uncertainty about them, as João has mentioned. The further you look into the future, the less uncertain things become. I do, however, feel like the United Nations projections have proven fairly predictive over the years, and they have been improving their methods over time. And moreover, at that time when people were saying, oh, population is going to peak around maybe 9 billion, maybe 10 billion, that's because projections were running to 2050. They were not running to the end of the century. That's just when the roll, stopped. And people weren't thinking ahead and thinking, well, that didn't look like it was coming down. So they just assume that's the end of the story, all resolved. But projections can be made for a longer period of time, and the UN had made them before, as did the World Bank. Around 1992, both of them published long-range projections going all the way to the end of this century.
Right.
To 2100. And those projections were pretty on the ball. They were on the money on what things are now, on what we now expect to be the situation at the end of the century. That was just before the Cairo Consensus, when discussion about population issues was muzzled, and where it became apolitical to think that fertility rates wouldn't just drop everywhere automatically without people doing anything on their own. There was like this belief, almost religious belief, in this irrepressible natural urge of humans to just have fewer children without any sort of help, any guidance, any support, nothing. And the UN projections ended up looking a little more timid for quite a few years. And then they peaked again. They started being adjusted because reality was not tracking those optimistic views from the Cairo Consensus. And around 2013, they started publishing the projections to the end of this century, and people were like, no, you're telling me we're going to be 11 to 12 billion at the end of the century? This is completely new information. It was not new. Yeah. That information had been around since at least the early 90s, and projections that are older still had already predicted that path. And we are following the trajectory that basically means business as usual. You're not doing very much. You're just letting fertility unfold naturally.
So projections are just that. They're in a way a best guess about what might happen. And we always want to keep in mind that depending on how people choose and what policies governments make, those numbers in the future could go up or they could go down. And the very act of projecting sometimes disguises that. If you tell people, we think it's going to be 10.8 billion in 2100, they lose sight of the fact that there's a choice about whether we continue on that path or whether we choose higher or lower.
Even the medium variant, which is the one that is cited most, and we have been sitting in a lot of studies recently, just going against even this medium variant, which I think, and probably Karin has her own opinions about this, that the medium variant assumes a lot of things, that fertility rates will continue to go down, that we will continue to make the progress that has been made in the last few decades in certain region of the world. So this is just a lot of assumptions that are inherent to these projections that are not usually discussed. So the uncertainty that is inherent to these projections should be even made clear, because this is just such an important part. That's why the UN now has a lot of different projections, such as the high variant, the constant fertility, that we would get no changes or whatsoever. So this is all a lot of different scenarios that put the population much above what is already expected of close to 11 billion. So this is important to focus.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And the medium variant, it's perhaps something that not everyone knows. Of the ones published by the UN, which I do think are the gold standard, that's the only real projection. The other ones are not projections. So the high variant and the low variant are just tracking the median projection and subtracting half a child and adding half a child throughout the time period under observation. And that just shows the dramatic difference that even a little change in initial conditions can make over time. It's a dramatic difference. Population takes a very, very long time to change its direction. Yep. But over time, the difference is gigantic. It's gigantic. So if everyone right now converged on a pattern of having just one child per couple, by the end of this century, our population would be about what it is, well, perhaps a little bit less than what it is now. It would not be 3 billion, it would be probably between 7 and 8 billion, because you have to work through all the momentum that's already baked into the system. If everyone overnight adopted a one-child model, whereas people think, oh no, our race will disappear if people don't keep having enough babies. It would take us to the end of this century to just get back to where we are right now if everyone was having just one child.
Right,
Yes.
right. So depending on what policies governments follow, we could see perhaps global population peaking toward the end of the century, or at least by the end of the century. That's at least a possibility. For many people, that would be sufficient, ending population growth. But Karin, you've written that aiming for population stabilization is insufficient. Why do you argue that?
We have this psychological fear of shrinkage. Basically, we have a fear of aging populations. We have a fear of going back to a smaller size than we are now. And these are not rational attitudes to have. And we have a planet that is sick. It's running a temperature. It's messed up in many ways. Species that are dying out at an unprecedented rate during, the observational window of human existence. We have catastrophic climate change going on. We have dramatic loss of soils for agriculture that people are just not particularly aware of, because that's just, it's like agricultural experts will be talking about it, but people outside of their world don't really know, right? Dramatic loss of agricultural soils from producing food for feeding billions of people. So we've been very good at extracting food from the soil, keeping these enormous numbers of people that we've manufactured ourselves, that we've created a vast human population. We've been very good at keeping them fed. By ransacking resources, we're going to need to produce food in the future when we're still going to be here. So we're talking about maybe 65 years worth of crop production without taking account of climate change, just from the soil perspective. And then water scarcity. And population growth, that's just one of the dang things, isn't it? Population growth is highest where water is scarcest. So what can we possibly imagine will happen when in a world that has climate change decimating crop productivity? About 50% more people than we have now, crops decimated by lack of water, climate change, and soil degradation, and a lot of people in areas that are already unstable. We're going to have a lot of human suffering, a lot of unrest, a lot of war, but perhaps not quite what people imagine. People imagine that, overpopulation is just chaos, apocalyptic chaos on the streets everywhere, like cars on fire. Overpopulation creeps up on us. It's not something that we achieve overnight. It takes decades to run a planet into the ground. But the symptoms are everywhere we look. Everywhere we look, the planet is saying, enough, stop abusing me. And people are not living like kings, right? The vast majority of the planet is living not very comfortable lives at all. And we have quite a lot of uncertainty and insecurity in our lives. If we care about our fellow human beings, we cannot think that maintaining this kind of life, where a few of us have a comfortable life, which is very easy for people to criticize consumption, because obviously there is consumption that is bad, but not all consumption is bad, and all people need to consume to survive, right? So not all of it can be avoided, but also a lot of it is necessary to give people lives with dignity and comfort. And a large proportion of the human population has neither of those things. If we want to achieve a world where everyone lives well, it has to be fewer of us, like dramatically fewer.
But okay, let's say I'm convinced of that. But as we all know, annually the global population is growing between 80 and 85 million people a year. So wouldn't it be good to at least start by stabilizing our numbers? And doesn't talk about population decrease scare people? João, let me bring you in. What do you think about that?
If I may, just to add another point too, because Karin mentioned topsoil fertility, which I think is a very important aspect, which is rarely mentioned. And I'm now studying collapsing and past societies, and topsoil fertility always, or almost always, appears as a problem that societies developed along the centuries, and they lose the capacity because they destroy their environment, they deforest, they abuse their soils. And this is observed even in societies that were just a fraction of what we are today. So this is the most important point that we have to bring here, because when we talk about post-complex societies that collapsed, we are talking about most of the times thousands of people, and rarely millions. And now, every time that we look at a nation, a country, we talk in the dozens or thousands or even billions if India or China. So it's a completely different picture. And all the things that Karin mentioned, there are many more: tropical forest loss, urban sprawl, marine fish capture. We can just name them all as the overpopulation is a multiplier of everything else. So this is just to put that on the side. To aim for stabilization, as Karin said, is not enough, because we are seeing all of the anthropic signs that we are in overshoot, and this is mentioned all the time. We have gone from we have abused the planet, we are abusing it. Right now we are in an ecological overshoot. We are consuming more resources than the earth can replenish every year, and this will continue to increase until 2050. It will probably be 3 hertz if the population keeps increasing and consuming higher in the food chain. So we have all of these compounding factors, and if we just remain as we are, it's just a matter of time until everything collapses, because this is completely unsustainable. The only thing that we can do at this point, even if it's scary, is not just stabilizing, but degrowing the population. And I usually talk about the human enterprise, as Dr. William Rees talked about, which is the economy, the global economy, plus the population. We have to decrease them both. It's not just a matter of the population or the economy. We have to go about it. Yeah.
But as you both know, I mean, when we bring up problems like soil degradation and the question of whether we're going to have enough food for people in the future, the way most agricultural scientists, most policymakers talk about those kind of questions is, well, look, we're going to improve our management of farmlands. We're going to improve our technologies. We're going to reduce food waste, perhaps. Very rarely do they say anything about limiting the number of mouths. And they seem to have, at least in the recent past, some justification for optimism that we could deal with it that way. Because, of course, food productivity has increased around the world in the last decades. We are feeding more people than ever. But what do you say to people, Karin, what do you say to people who say, well, look, you're flagging real issues, but the answer is better management and smarter technologies?
Well, this belief that technology can fix everything because it has allowed us to hack the planet basically in the past and basically steal resources from the future is not common amongst agricultural scientists who by and large are not very optimistic. Experts in food production are not optimistic. I have met them, and I have met them in conferences. They are not optimistic, and they don't come out and say, "Oh, this will not be a problem." They're trying to come up with some sort of pathway, and always trying to come up with something, a little more speculative every time, because the problem keeps getting worse. But they're not saying it will happen, you will be fine. They're trying to say it could happen this way. It could be okay, but no scientist worth their salt in the situation that we're in would lie outright and say it's going to be fine, because probably not, probably won't be fine. And we don't know the future. I mean, it's possible that some magnificent technological breakthrough is going to come in, is going to bring in a new green revolution. But that was low-hanging fruit. That's what I understand from discussions with them. That was low-hanging fruit, and the improvements we're seeing in productivity now are 0.5% here. A little bit there. They're tiny, and when you consider a scenario where climate change could reduce productivity by 50% for some key crops, that's not going to cut it. And that's not taking account of all the factors combined, soil degradation, lack of water, all of those things combined, and lack of some key fertilizers, they're running out. They are not optimistic. The people who are techno-optimists, that's a position to have, but it's a bit like religious faith. You can't just jump off a building and say, God save me, because you can't just trust that future completely hypothetical non-existing technology will save you and then keep on doing things that will hurt you, because that makes no sense. That's irrational and immoral, because you're hurting people that have no choice in the matter. Sure, younger people haven't chosen to be here, and children who haven't come yet but will, and they will perhaps come into a planet that cannot accommodate them at all.
If I may just to add,
go ahead,
Professor, because not to give the impression that we are Luddites here, that we completely dismiss the advancements that were made in technology, because these people, these techno-optimists, are founding their beliefs in something. For example, there has been a lot of improvement. Now it's less, as Karin said, but in the past there has been a lot of improvements in crop yields per hectare, for example, and they base this belief that they extrapolate into the future that it will continue to happen. The problem is that, as Karin just said, that this progress have been slowing down, and they have practically stabilized entirely. We are not achieving the progress that we needed to continue to feed the population and hack away from the planet and stealing its resources to continue to increase our population as we have done, because we don't have this capacity, and the techno-optimists will eventually go encounter a wall or an obstacle that will be they will not go through it, because there are limits, and this is a huge problem in their discourse. When we talk with a lot of these people, they do not recognize the biophysical limits of the planet, that everyone depends on something from the planet, and this is just a compounding issue.
And I suppose, even if there's uncertainty about whether we can keep barreling ahead, feeding more and more people, that might well be a reason to step back and be a little more cautious. After all, if we get it wrong, even if we get it right for 3 generations, if we get it wrong for that 4th generation, you're talking about really potentially tremendous suffering. To switch a little bit here, although Karin did bring up climate change, and for many people, climate change is sort of just shorthand for all our environmental problems. They just think of it as climate change. So if we take a look at a graph showing global population and CO2 emission trends from 1850 to the present, they seem to move in tandem. So my question is climate change itself evidence that humanity is currently overpopulated?
I can. Yeah, sorry. No, I was just going to say that climate change in itself is not a proof that we are overpopulated, because there's something like natural climate change, which is provoked by volcanoes and ocean currents and the orbital Earth and solar variation. So just saying that climate change is evidence that we are populated is not enough. But saying that in the last thousands and millennia, actually almost 1 million years, we have never achieved the concentration of carbon dioxide that we have in the atmosphere right now is correct. That is much more. That is stronger evidence that the climate change now is provoked by humanity, by human activity. So just to give that there. Sorry, Karin. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. Maybe we should assign girls' skills. We don't talk over each other.
Okay.
I assume that our viewers are not climate denialists, and we don't have to explain climate change as an anthropogenic, catastrophic risk of cumulative damage to, the atmosphere's capacity to regulate temperature in the planet. Population growth alongside economic growth the 2 of them are the principal drivers of climate change. Yes, in the past history of this planet, there has been climate change that was not human-made, but this one is. Now, is it the case that the reason we have a catastrophically altered atmosphere is because there are too many of us? Yes. If there were few people living high on the hog on fossil fuels, that wouldn't happen. But then one could also ask, well, in a world where there wasn't reliance on fossil fuels, could you have 10 billion people, 11 billion people right now? Could you have 7 billion people sustainably over time in a world that never got hooked on fossil fuels? Perhaps, from the perspective of climate change, not the perspective of maintaining healthy ecosystems, maintaining our ability to feed ourselves, not destroying the vast majority of interesting life forms on this planet. So that would not follow. These are separate questions. What I find today is that because overpopulation became taboo since the CAR consensus in about the mid-90s, when people want to express anxiety about overpopulation, they find that they can express pretty much the same anxiety by calling climate change. What they mean is overpopulation.
So part of what you're saying there then is that we really shouldn't just look at climate change as in isolation. It's part of a larger suite of problems, perhaps global environmental problems. But I want to get back to try to ask a simple question. Is climate change evidence that we're overpopulated? Because some people would say, look, we need to change our lifestyles. We need to consume less. Again, we need new technologies. So would a population of 8 or 12 billion vegetarians driving electric cars powered by solar electricity, would that be sustainable? João, why don't you take a crack at that?
Okay, so if we keep increasing the population, we know that climate change is just one side of all of our impact. We have the planetary boundaries, which include the carbon emissions and the greenhouse emissions. Those are just one in many of the planetary boundaries that we are facing. And we know that even if everyone went vegetarian or even vegan, we could have a lot of progress here, but that would be far from, let's call it, sustainable, because people need to be fed, people need materials, people need houses, people need clothes, people need water, and transportation and energy, and all of these things aren't just something that figures and reflects, even if we are all vegetarian and even if we are all vegan, this would create a lot of other impacts, because most of the time, and this is just going from the current perspective now, people that are usually vegan and vegetarian usually have a very stable or high income. And income is a very good proxy for affluence. So if we have that money in our pocket, we are probably spending it on other stuff that doesn't make us all that sustainable. So that's just one side of the question. I care a lot about income because I think this is a very important aspect, and it's mentioned in, for example, a Nature study of 2018 that says what would take for all of us to have a good life. And they reached the conclusion that it would probably be similar to what people now are living in Guatemala, Morocco, or the Philippines. And this was in 2018, and they did it for 7 billion. We are already 7.8, so it's already outdated. Probably we would have to put more austerity in there. We are continuously degrading the biosphere, which means that the entire carrying capacity of the planet will shrink. So the ceiling that we would have of these types of welfare that people have in these 3 countries would probably go even lower, something like Chad or something, because when we put all of the things together, the ecological footprint, the income that would be necessary, it's far from something that an utopia of 12 billion would allow.
So what I'm hearing is, if you simply imagine the current 7.8 billion people, your claim then is that to really live sustainably, those people would have to consume an awful lot less per capita. there are several problems with that. One is that people in general don't want to consume less, apparently. The other is that it's not clear that there's a safe and equitable pathway toward hugely less consumption. So all of that might well drive you toward arguing that to really have a sustainable population, it's going to have to be a lot less. João, you mentioned the 9 planetary boundaries for safe human use of the biosphere. That, of course, refers back to that work by the Stockholm Resilience Institute. And some of those other boundaries that they talk about are ocean acidification, nitrogen deposition, human freshwater withdrawals from natural systems. So their point is that climate change, keeping the Earth from heating too much and changing the climate too much, that's one important problem that we should be looking at and limiting our demands. But there are 8 others that they've recognized. So let me perhaps ask Karin, when you think about some of these other planetary boundaries, what role does limiting population numbers play in staying within those safe boundaries?
Stabilize the population would not achieve that. We've never really got to your question, but certainly everything that goes towards reducing an increase in our numbers would make things less bad. And catastrophes accrue less rapidly, but it would not be enough. Our population at the size that we're in is driving all of those limits to be breached. That's still with like 6 billion people living in poverty, right? And as John was mentioning, studies that have looked at what kind of standard of living will be achievable for everyone. It's a pretty miserable standard because our numbers are so large. And leaving aside the very practical and obvious question, how would you implement such a standard, just bring everyone down or, equalize everyone at a fairly miserable standard? We know even secondary education is available because it's just too much. Well, let's leave that aside. Is that a world that we want? And what is the trade-off here? Well, what is it that we're trying to protect that is so important that we would face a world where we are condemning a vast proportion of humanity to poverty, saying to the people that are living in comfort, you're monsters, and telling all other species on this planet, bye-bye, starve and die, What is it that we're trying to protect? We're trying to protect atavistic ideas that should have died a very long time ago, right? When we're talking about, for example, veganism, and like these are the very, very best people in the world, right? They override a very genuine human taste for pleasure, right? Eating eggs and cheese is delightful, right? I try to minimize my consumption of animal products, but they're genuinely tasty, right? I've met many vegans and vegetarians who readily confess they find their convictions waver when they smell bacon, right? It's not something that it was just easy for them. It's really hard. Whereas having loads of children is not something that comes naturally to most of us when we have a choice. And that's why we have pronatalist culture just relentlessly telling us a normal person has children, or a normal person wants to dedicate their adult life to rearing children. A normal person will have a few children, depending on the country you're in, that could be as many as 9 or 12. Depending on the country you're in, could be a lot that culture is telling you that's what you should desire. If we had this urge to have, for a woman, quite uncomfortable and very painful way to bring a little person into the world, and then years of drudgery, and yet, the delights of raising a child, but parents reliably rank childcare as the least enjoyable of all their activities, right? And there's a lot of research showing that parents' happiness dips relative to before they had a child. So it's not something that comes either naturally to us or something that gives us a lot of enjoyment, unlike
well, there are
being asked to give up.
There are some compensations as someone who has two kids, but
I have a child myself. There are compensations, but my point is we're trying to protect a system of belief that is that humans cannot help themselves. They just want to have lots of babies, and that's just not true. right?
Absolutely.
We're operating in this saturated environment full of messages telling people they have to have lots of children, or they have to have at least some, or they're not normal. And the very presence of these messages tells you that, historically has proven to be the case that you have to keep hammering them in, or people are not going to pop out those babies.
And there is some pretty good evidence for that. I mean, after all, throughout the world, we've seen that when women and couples are provided with contraception, the fertility levels tend to come down relatively quickly. Karin, you're from Brazil. Several generations ago, fertility levels were quite high there. I think they're quite a bit below replacement rate now. João, you're from Portugal, and I believe the fertility rate is quite low there.
Yeah,
that's something that was quite different several generations ago. So, absolutely, Karin, the evidence is clear, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's perhaps a little. This is the point I feel the population movement was a little hijacked by the ideologues from the Cairo consensus, in that it became an article of faith. So as long as you give people contraception, they're going to use it. And you have to factor in the cultural factors. They're driving people to desire large families. And if people desire a large family, and you're saying, well, just have exactly the family size that you like, we're not going to pass judgment, we're not going to say it's a bad idea, we're not going to say it's going to cause problems for your society, then in some cases that can mean a family of 5, 6, 9, 12 children, even if contraception is present. In Brazil, there wasn't much of a relationship between contraception becoming available and the vast drop in fertility that occurred. You always need to have some means of fertility regulation as a necessary condition, but it's insufficient. It is insufficient. In Brazil, there was this shift in attitudes where people started seeing a large family as weird and, not the done thing. And
so how did that happen?
Small. Well, one of the major factors that appears to have influenced people's ideas about this is soap operas. Where, for narrative expediency reasons, families were portrayed as unnaturally, for the reality that applied at the time, unnaturally small, because it was much more interesting to have dramas involving several feuding families of 2 or 3 kids, rather than maybe 2 with 10 each. That just made the story more interesting. And what happened was it got internalized, and people started seeing a family of 2 or 3 at most, as that's what a normal family looks like. And seeing a large family, such as my mother's mother had 9 children.
Yep.
And that at the time is completely normal. Like they frequently had lunch with someone that had 20. And I don't even know how that's possible, but 20, and that was normal. And by the time my mother came of age, it was no longer the done thing.
Right.
And that was much more about culture and attitudinal changes than about, there was more education in Brazil, or poverty had declined. On the contrary, the changes in fertility were the drivers of those changes that followed, making people's lives better.
Right.
If I may add, Professor, just a point, because it's also about government. And this is something that leaves me very cynical at the moment, because all of the countries, or at least according to the UN, 62% in 2017 of countries that have achieved below replacement rates have enacted pro-natalist policies. And this is just something that it leaves me in despair, because this is countries like Portugal. We have one of the lowest fertility rates in the world, but I cannot bear myself to have a conversation with someone I know, or on the streets, or anyone else, that speaks about this as an achievement. There is not even the imaginary there. There's not even the place for the narrative to propose that this has been something that took a lot of trouble, that something that took a change in perspective in the country, and is just mentioned as something that needs to be put away. It was done, and now we need to replace it. We need to bring back the fertility rates up. We need to put it above 2.1 for replacement. And this is something that if countries achieved below replacement rate, the first thing that they should do is hold on to it. It's just doing everything they could to hold on to it. And this is not being seen. It's and not even talked about.
So how do we get people then to see below replacement fertility or decreasing populations as an achievement?
I think we have to attack the growthist dogma as a whole, because all those ideas are wedded together. So there's this fear of population shrinkage that goes hand in hand with this idea that the economy must grow. No matter what, the economy must grow, which is killing the planet. It's killing our life chances. And then it goes, oh, but the population must grow to keep the economy growing. And all technology will solve everything, and resources are infinite, which are just mystical thinking. It's not even rational. It's just deeply irresponsible. And those ideas need to be attacked. Growthism underlies capitalism, of course, underlies neoliberal economics, underlies the platforms that most of our governments pursue as though they were pursuing our interests. And they're, instead of trying to see people's lives are being made better by their policies, they're just checking if certain numbers are moving on a spreadsheet. And that apparently that spreadsheet tells us we should incentivize people to have babies even when they don't want to. We should, open up businesses that are socially not useful and environmentally damaging because they'll cause a little number to rise. All of those ideas go together, and one of them, just one of them, is the fear of shrinkage, this fear that the population must not shrink. It's irrational. Just imagine how much better lives could be in so many countries where, just imagine like property becoming more affordable, just the air becoming cleaner, all jobs becoming better paid, because the population is shrinking. Those are not things to fear if you care about people rather than numbers on a spreadsheet.
So part of what we're looking for then is, and this is something philosophers have been talking about for thousands of years, we need to focus on living good lives, not piling up wealth. Maybe at some points in human history, it made sense to pursue greater wealth to improve our lives. Maybe that's no longer the case. So that makes a certain amount of sense to me. I want to bring in another aspect of sustainability and population here, though. And the simplest way to get to it might just be to ask, what might a sustainable global population be? And should we think about that in terms just of human well-being, or do we want to think about sustainability in terms of leaving sufficient habitat and resources for other species? João, you shared with me a graphic from, I think it was originally from an academic paper, and it's subsequently been reprinted many times, Earth's land mammals by weight. And we'll throw that up for our viewers to see as well. And when you look at that graphic, you see that the vast majority of current animal flesh on the planet today is human beings and our pets and livestock. And only a few percentage points is still represented by wild animals, all the whales, all the great apes, all the rodents, on and on and on. We've taken so much of it. When we think about sustainability, when you two think about sustainability, how important is it that we share the landscape more generously with other people? I'll give each of you a chance to answer that. Karin, why don't you go first?
Well, you mentioned philosophers, and one thing that comes up in philosophy a lot is that it's just generally very dicey to make choices for others. And albeit that some people out there are extremely anthropocentric and would say, I don't care about tigers, I don't care about whales, I don't care about sea turtles, I don't care about birds, they're all disappearing, I don't care, all I care about is humans. That's not the case for everybody. Like, lots of us do care and feel that our world is being impoverished by driving all the species to extinction. And those yet to come may also share those sensibilities. And we're foreclosing options for them. We're basically saying you will not have an option to live in a world where African elephants exist in the wild. These magnificent, intelligent, interesting species will not be in your world because we decided that we wanted to, I don't know, I wanted to have kids and drive an SUV and, you know, eat steak every day. So you don't get to live in a world that has elephants in it. And that is inherently unfair because a lot of people have different value commitments than anthropocentric people, and we have to account for them as well. Those are not unreasonable value commitments. An unreasonable value commitment would say, I want a world in which I and only I get to drive an SUV every day and eat steak and, you know, do everything that my heart desires without thinking about everybody else.
So you would say, and João, I'll give you a chance in a moment, but Karin, you would say that even just thinking in terms of human interest, we have good reasons not to want a depauperate world. Absolutely.
Even if we did not think that animals had moral standing, that their suffering matters, even if we did not think of them at all, on the basis of taking account of the interests and values that apply to other people and they're legitimate, they're not, you know, wrong in any way. No one is going to say that you're wrong to think that world that contains wildlife in it is the better world than one that doesn't. They just perhaps value, you know, meeting their consumptive needs or their procreative aspirations more than that. But they're not going to say it's wrong. But you have to take into account that a lot of people do value a world that has wildlife in it, even leaving aside the many potential consequences to human life on a planet that has ruined ecosystems, like, for example, the, you know, decline of bees for agriculture and all sorts of other things that we don't know yet, because we keep, like, you know, pulling things from this Jenga tower, and it's like, oh, I wonder what will happen if I take this other one out. You know, it could be that a lot of unforeseen consequences will be visited on us from messing up with so many ecosystems at once. But even if we do not care or do not know about any of those things, there's still a lot of people that care about a world that has wildlife in it. I'm one of them.
I am too, and I think we're in the majority, actually. João, your view on this, how much weight should we put in thinking about creating sustainable societies? How much weight should we put on sharing the landscape justly or generously with other species?
So this is a very debatable and controversial as well topic. So there have been some attempts to quantify what would be a sustainable population, human population. I think the estimates range from 300 million to 4.3 billion. So, and this all depends on what type of life and how much room we want to leave for other species on the planet. So it would be certain that 300 million would live probably with higher affluence levels and would live a better quality of life than 4.3 billion. And they would have to be put together probably to leave half of the planet, for example, as Edward Wilson has suggested for wildlife. But this also takes me to one recurrent point, which is, can we even see humanity as ever achieving sustainability? Because if we think that even in the Neolithic, just hunters, men and women equipped with spears and just large brains, and they were probably able to drive a lot of species to extinction, including the mammoth, including also climate changes at the time. But we were talking about much smaller populations and with much less impact, even per capita. So we would have to, even if we want to talk about sustainability, we would have to account for some acceptable rate of extinction if we wanted to drive this argument forward. One of my suggestions would probably be to try and keep it below the background extinction rate, the historical one of the planet, so the natural one with the processes of mass extinction. But when we look at the rates of extinction in mammals and birds and insects today, it's just so far from the background extinction rate that we would need a complete changeover. And at the moment, I don't know how to make this possible, or even if it would be possible with the smaller range of 300 million living with higher degrees of affluence. I don't know if it's possible or not, but it's worth a try to reduce the population because it's a multiplier for everything else. And if we are less, we would make less impact and we would allow for other species to thrive on the planet.
So really, no matter how optimistic we are about genuine sustainability, our ability to achieve that, and no matter whether we're more on the anthropocentric or the biocentric side of things, probably there's a good argument that 7.8 billion people is too many, and that we'd be better off with a much smaller global population. So both of you have made arguments to that effect, and for me, as an old guy, I got to say it's great seeing smart, young, passionate people who are talking about this. Even beyond whether I agree with you about X, Y, or Z, just to be having these conversations seems so important. So, in the remaining few minutes that we have here, let me ask you to talk a little bit about your work as activists and scholars and how your focus on population issues has been received by your peers. So, Karin, why don't you go first?
Well, my work is challenging one element of the Karin consensus, which is this belief that there is a virtually absolute human right to have as many children as you feel like, no matter the circumstances, no matter the situation, and that is the reason why governments shouldn't try to incentivize people to have fewer children or discourage them from having more. It would be a violation of human rights, and you can't do anything. You must have your hands tied and just watch. Basically, that's the current consensus, and I've sought to challenge this here. When it comes to challenging the idea of a fairly absolute right to create rights holders, which involves basically creating a whole other person, completely innocent, didn't have a say in the matter, and creating this person creates obligations on others, which again do not have to say on this. It's not that difficult for people to see that, that doesn't follow. It's not difficult, especially in an academic context where people are accustomed to this kind of thinking. Outside of an environment of academic inquiry, I still find that a lot of people are very disturbed by population growth and just don't know quite how to put it in words. And don't know quite how to articulate in a way that doesn't sound bad. It's so easy to say the wrong thing when you're concerned about population, because people might think, you just don't like people, you don't like babies, or you don't like people with a certain background. And it's so easy to go wrong when people really mean well and are just genuinely concerned. So that's what I found in my more activist side of things, that people can get really frustrated because they just see this relentless trajectory towards an impoverishment of our planet, and we're painting ourselves into a corner. And a lot of them are older as well, have seen a lot of change in their lifetimes, and see younger people perhaps more concerned about issues of identity and not really paying much attention to environmental issues. So they often feel very frustrated, and they lack the vocabulary and sometimes say things the wrong way, but they mean well by and large.
So I'm curious, you're writing or have written your dissertation, your PhD dissertation on this. Did your academic advisors try to warn you off the topic?
No, but I could not find a program that would have, an existing program where I could have done my research. I had to design my own research, and in a few discussions with fellow PhD students, it struck me how my topic is very broad relative to what a lot of other people do, especially in the realm of normativity, where you're talking about legal or moral rights. people often take like a very narrow little topic and are focused on, differences of opinion between two authors maybe, and
Right.
basically taking this big chunky assumed human right that people prefer not to talk about. And I'm saying that's just wrong. That's not justifiable. We have at best have preconditioned and limited the right to have children. So it's a very meaty topic, and other topics just seem like very nuanced. And when people are asked in my group to explain their work, they take many lines to explain what they're trying to do. And I can just say, my topic's about overpopulation.
Your topic is about securing people's rights in the real world where there are ecological limits.
How many words you want? Like I can give you a very good idea where I'm at with one word, but
Well, Karin, I'm very glad that you persisted in that work. João, talk a little bit about your academic work and your activist work, if you'd like.
Okay, so my work in academia started with my master's, where I attempted to include the human overpopulation was by following a course of ecology, because that's what I found that would be more palatable to digest this topic of human overpopulation. As Karin just mentioned, there is no course just focused on population. I went and it was a struggle. I faced a lot of resistance in my university, in which they ultimately they scaled down their attacks because it was fierce. Well, my first presentation of the work, it was very, very difficult because it brought accusations of Nazism and
Wow.
racism and fascism, all of that stuff with wow. a room filled with people, and it was like an embarrassment to the university. So they did like a scientific committee, and they told, okay, we need to follow intellectual honesty, and we need to have freedom of expression in the university. This cannot happen again. It's just ridiculous. If a student wants to pursue his topic, he should be free to do it. There should not be professors in the university just standing and facing so much resistance for the students that try to bring their own topics of research, which is so rare already because most students just follow what other labs are doing and other professors
Right.
are doing the research.
Right.
And I didn't do that. So in my master's, I just tried to see where human overpopulation was connected to. This was my topic. I tried to see where our numbers were multiplying everything else. And this was basically what I did in my master's. And now in my PhD, I'm trying to continue to do work on population and overshoot, and trying to show that environmental determinism and this overshoot in the past of past complex societies was important, and it's now more important than ever because it had a small impact, magnitude, severity, and intensity in the past, but it's now much larger today. So the picture has changed tremendously, and I try to continue to incorporate it. My activism, I would describe myself as a quiet activist. I'm more of the type of, I write, and I don't usually go to the streets. I did it once last year in Lisbon. I went to a climate, one of those climate, not parades, but I'm missing the word, but it was just to experience what would be to feel the people and what their common cause. But I'm more
Right.
of the type of talking about things, just talking with you, Professor, and Karin on shows like this, and writing articles and my blog. That's the way that I think that I can help in this, and just raising consciousness and awareness of the issue, and trying to articulate it in the most eloquent way I can.
Well, I'm very grateful that you've stuck with the effort, and I'm grateful to your university as well for backing you up. It sounds like at a crucial period. For those of you who've enjoyed our discussion today with Karin and João, there will be links on our website to their work, and I really encourage you to check it out because it's very interesting. Karin, João, thank you so much for taking the time today to speak with us on the population factor. I appreciate it, and I really hope we can have you back again sometime soon.
That would be great.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.